Hello and welcome to the MyClayCo studio. I am Tegan and today we are going to be talking about baking polymer clay. Now, easily the most frequently asked questions that land in our inbox are all around baking and curing polymer clay, so we wanted to do a whole video on it for you today. We are going to be sharing our top tips as well as the crucial things that you need to know, and we're also going to be answering some of those frequently asked questions that we get. Before we get into our top tips, one of the things that you should know about polymer clay is that it should be a bit bendy once it's baked properly. That's because unlike some other clays, it does have plasticizers added to it. So it means that once it is cured, it does have that slight flex to it. So if you are baking your polymer clay and do find that it's a bit flexible afterwards, congratulations, you have cured your polymer clay correctly. If you're not finding this, if you're finding that your polymer clay is brittle once it's baked, you can snap it in half, or when you're drilling jump ring holes, it's just crumbling around the hole, then you definitely need to watch this video. Let's get into those top tips. The first two tips that I'm going to give you are probably the most crucial things that you need to know when you're baking your polymer clay. So number one is the temperature. So temperature seems like an easy thing. The packet says bake at 130 degrees, so you turn your oven to 130 degrees, but it doesn't bake correctly. Now, this is quite often because ovens are fickle things, and although you've got the temperature set at 130 degrees, it might not actually be baking at 130 degrees. You might find that it's baking at 110 degrees or it's baking at 150 degrees, which quickly becomes a problem because you're going to find that your clay is either going to be overbaked or underbaked. So if your clay is underbaked, it can mean that your pieces will be brittle, whereas if it's overbaked, you might find that your clay burns. So it's really crucial that you know what temperature your oven is baking at. Sit tight because I have another tip for you in a moment that will help with this issue. Now, I said that there were two crucial things. The second crucial thing is the baking time. Now, with polymer clay, quite often the baking time is around 30 minutes, depending on the thickness of your pieces. It is important that you bake it for this minimum baking time. So if you're going to be baking it for 10 or 15 minutes, you probably will find that it's underbaked. Now, something that is interesting about polymer clay is that you can't really overbake it so long as the temperature of your oven is correct. So for example, if you were to leave your clay pieces in the oven for 40 minutes or 50 minutes or an hour, you will likely find that they come out just as they would if you baked them for the 30 minutes. And this is one of the fabulous things about polymer clay because it means that you can bake it, add details to it, bake it again, add more details, and even bake it a third time. It's become a bit of a joke in the studio that I quite often forget about my pieces and I don't set an alarm and they're in there for an hour or so.
It's true, she leaves them in there all the time. Like sometimes for over an hour. I have to take them out all the time.
So if you do leave them in there for longer than that minimum baking time, don't stress, they will likely be fine. So the crucial thing to know is that you need to have them in there for that minimum baking time, but if you do leave them in there a little bit longer, it's not going to cause any harm. Now, I said I would have a tip for you around the baking temperature, and that is to use an oven thermometer. Now, oven thermometers are quite inexpensive. You can normally pick them up for $10 or $15 from a hardware store or Kmart or Target, and that will mean that you're baking at an accurate temperature. So even if your oven dial is saying that it's baking at 130 and your oven's at 150, you'll know. Our next tip is to follow the manufacturer's instructions. You might find that different brands of clay have different recommended baking temperatures or different recommended baking times. So it's really important that you read what it says on the packet to ensure that you don't underbake or overbake your clay. So our next tip is a simple one. Always make sure that you preheat your oven, just as you would if you were baking cookies or something. If you don't preheat your oven, you run that risk that your pieces are not going to be baking at the correct temperature for the right amount of time and they'll end up underbaked. Our final tip is to test. So before you get started, you want to make sure that you can find your oven's optimal baking time and temperature. You might find that your oven dial should be set at 150 degrees, whereas somebody else might find that theirs should be set at 110. It really depends on the oven that you're using. So if you're just starting out, you've got a new oven, we recommend doing some white tester pieces. Now, the reason why we say white is because it will be easy to tell if your oven temperature is too hot because you'll be able to see that they're slightly burnt. Whereas if you do your tester pieces in a darker color, you may not notice this. So get your tester pieces, pop them in the oven, and from there, you can adjust the temperature higher or lower depending on what you find it needs. Now, I promised at the start that we would go through a few of the frequently asked questions that we get, so here they are. Why is my polymer clay bendy? We've already touched on this. Polymer clay does have plasticizers in it, so unlike some other clays, it will be bendy if it is cured correctly. Why is my clay brittle once it's baked? So there generally are two reasons for this. So one of them is going to be all of the baking temperature and time stuff that we've discussed today. The other reason it could be though is the type of clay that you're using. A common thing that we see for beginners is that they start making jewelry with Sculpey 3. Now Sculpey 3 is an excellent modeling clay, but it isn't so good for making earrings, and you will probably find that if you do make earrings out of Sculpey 3 that it will be brittle once it's baked. So if you are looking to use Sculpey clay, we recommend using Sculpey Primo or Sculpey Souffle. There are a range of other clays out there on the market, like the Cernit range, Fimo Professional, that are also excellent for making jewelry with. So just do your research before you try out a new clay. Can I increase the temperature that I'm baking at to make my pieces bake quicker? No, your pieces will burn. Do I need to tent my pieces? Now, for those that don't know what tenting is, basically it means just putting a piece of foil over your clay while it's baking so that the tops of them don't burn. Now, we don't ever tent our pieces and we don't find that our pieces burn. So it might be that for those people that are tenting their clay pieces, it could be that the element in their oven is quite close to their clay pieces while they're baking. And this can be quite common in toaster ovens. So I would just test to see if you need to tent your pieces. If you do find that you've got your clay baking at the correct temperature and it is still burning, then it is something that you can explore and see if it works for you. What baking surface do I bake my pieces on? Now, this is going to come down to personal preference as well. So we almost always bake our pieces on a gloss ceramic tile. We like working on gloss ceramic tiles and we can then just pop them in the oven afterwards. But there are a range of other things that you can bake on. Some of the common ones that we see are either baking paper or also just normal copy paper. So again, have a play around and find out what works for you. Do I need a special oven to bake polymer clay in? No. You don't need a special oven. It's not like some other ceramics where you need to put them in a kiln. You can bake polymer clay in your normal ordinary oven. Now, if you don't want to bake in your normal oven, that is totally fine. You can look at one of those mini toaster oven options. You will probably find though that they do seem to be a little bit more fickle with getting the right temperature. So you will probably have to do just a little bit more testing to make sure that you get your baking temperature correct. Can I bake in an air fryer? So we actually tested this and found that we could cure our clay correctly in an air fryer. So it probably wouldn't be my first option because if your clay pieces aren't stuck down to your tile, they will whiz around in there and probably destroy them. But I guess it is an option, it's probably just not the best option. Can I bake my pieces in the same oven that I cook food in? While polymer clay isn't food safe, it is non-toxic. So yes, you can bake your pieces in your normal oven. It is recommended though, don't bake food and clay in there at the same time. And if you are to burn your clay in the oven, I would definitely recommend giving your oven a proper clean before using it again for food. I hope you found our tutorial on baking polymer clay helpful today. If you do have any questions, we would love to help you out. Just drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, please, if you have enjoyed it, like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.